Hello, Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. My name is Natasha Nasuha and I am a final year student pursuing a bachelor's degree in Law and Commerce from Management and Science University. I am devoting my time into producing this thesis for the research project, and as the researcher, I usually find it impossible to finish this thesis until it is fully completed. And as a result, as a student battling through the pandemic, I've seen one thing that practically every decent human being on the planet desires, which is we have one goal in our minds, which is to put an end to the COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, by becoming vaccinated, we can put an end to it. The world is approaching into its third year of the pandemic next year. While the world hopes the pandemic will end soon, it appears that it is unlikely sooner because some people refuse to get vaccinated. Therefore, the title of my research project is Refusing COVID-19 Vaccines, Can This Be Treated as a Breach of Duty? A case study of the United States and Malaysia. To the respected panels, now I will guide you to the first chapter of this study, which is the introduction or the beginning of the big explanation to the question. On the top view of the slide, I portrayed 3 Facebook chat messages. The first one being that this lady, with her obliged intention not to be vaccinated, updates her status being there is not much truth that we know about the vaccine and it is my own right to not be vaccinated. Then, the second person replies to the first lady, implying that you have to get vaccinated or you will owe a duty to others. The conversation between these two was cut by a third person who sits back at these two by their place and saying that how will the world achieve herd immunity, or in simpler words, majority cure from the coronavirus if the anti-vaccination movement and myth believers still exist? This form of conversation has been going on since the COVID-19 pandemic starts, with the goal of eradicating the virus and curing global infection through the development of vaccinations. It appears unlikely that it will happen sooner because this type of individuals are having difficulty in deciding if vaccination is a right or a violation of duty and believe that it is up to themselves to select on which side they want to be on. Take a look at the comparison between the anti-vaccination movements and the pro-vaccination movements. These anti-vaccination movements are mostly influenced by social media, which generates viral interest among the general public, which then spreads to the national news, persuading people to believe these myths, falsehood, misconception, untruths concerning this vaccination. This instills skepticism or doubts in the audience, particularly among the elderly, who are more likely to believe the media rather than virtuous persons. Therefore, if the anti-vaccination is a rights movement, to what extent is duty being breached? In turn, pro-vaccination advocates are attempting to measure and trying their best to encourage these anti-vaccine troops to have different perspectives on vaccination with the sole intention that the truth will persuade them to embrace the vaccine. While every human being deserves protection for their own rights, including freedom of speech and expression, the question is whether refusing COVID-19 vaccination is a breach of duty to others, as this research aims to demonstrate. The country depicts anti-vaccination activists fighting for their right to choose whether or not to get vaccinated. The majority of news, stories, articles depicting these anti-vaccine movements or demonstrations originate in the democratically governed United States. As seen in the slides, some activists have reasons for not to get vaccinated, ranging from skepticism into fighting for civil rights. While there are so many pro-vaccine movements, goodly appears to have affected the general public opinion, but it does not appear to have encouraged anti-vaccine movements. into agreeing to take the vaccines. In the United States, we have haphazardly seen the movement for personal rights. Next, let's take a look at the anti-vaccine scenario in Malaysia. Before adopting and analyzing the research findings, it is critical to consider both sides. Anti-vaccination rates are on the rise in Malaysia, notably also among the elderly, who are defined as people aged 60 and up. So Malaysian individuals are not demonstrating in the streets comparing to the United States, but the war is occurring primarily on our screens as social media conflicts into WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, where people tend to express their opinions without first gathering true facts. On social media, there are two sides of the war, much like the iPhone as illustrated on the slide. There are pro-vaccines who believe that messages should be straightforward with the correct narrative to encourage people to take the vaccine, which is important to note that there are more pro-vaccines in Malaysia than anti-vaccines, thank God, who believe that these messages should be straightforward with the correct narrative in order to encourage people to take the vaccine. However, this is in contrast to the anti-vaccine, which implies that people should avoid the vaccines before it kills your children too. Here, we can see that it plays an emotional and personal narrative with personalized messages imputing that vaccines are dangerous and could cause death. While rejecting the anti-vaccine narrative because their goal is to spread misinformation online, pro-vaccine movements are encouraged to employ a variety of different communication and strategies to persuade people to embrace the vaccine. Therefore, these anti-vaccine movements, while playing an emotional influential narrative, might jeopardize the global efforts to end the coronavirus pandemic. Regardless, the coronavirus will continue to spread, and when people refuse to get vaccinated, there will be more persons infected. Hence, the duty owed to others are breached because when one person lacks the antibody to protect themselves from the virus and hereby stimulate on the spreading of the virus. Following a brief overview of this research, the issue statement of this research claims that the COVID-19 pandemic spread over the world. The number of people who chose to become anti-vaccinators are increasing. Despite the influence of health ministries in pushing individuals to take vaccinations, people tend to maintain their beliefs about vaccination myths rather than changing their views and agreeing to take the vaccines. If a person refuses to get immunized or vaccinated, their scope of duty, particularly in the area of health, has been breached sufficiently, raising the risk of COVID-19 spreading to their family, friends, workplace, public spaces, and other environments. So, the research question would be, how is refusing vaccine a breach of one's duty care to oneself and others? What is the scope of the duty? Where do these anti-vaccination activists express their views and their findings? Where do this anti-COVID vaccination movement in the United States and Malaysia began to persuade the general public? And who is eligible, as in whether there is a set of criteria or demographics that must be met in order to achieve the COVID-19 vaccination, and what application can keep track of the flow. Therefore, these are the research objectives to determine whether refusing the COVID-19 vaccination as a breach of one's duty of care and to what extent of that scopes of duty is being breached. The literature review for this study begins in Chapter 2. In the study, I divide the literature review in 5 categories. The subjects include the prelude, aims of vaccination, confronting anti-vaccination movements, establishing duty of care in vaccination carelessness, and the effect of the vaccines on our future and our duties. In these studies, there are several key terms to be acquainted with. First and foremost, there is the virus that triggered the pandemic, which is the coronavirus. also known as COVID-19, which is a deadly virus that can roam undetected among us, and in fact, nearly everyone that comes into contact with it. From the introduction, you may have heard the term of herd immunity a lot. Herd immunity occurs when a considerable section of a society, which is the herd, becomes immune to a disease and making disease transmission improbable from person to person. While the human immune system teaches the human body to fight viruses in a safe manner, they work by injecting a little quantity of the vaccine into the human body. Vaccines are subjected to rigorous testing before they are distributed to verify that they are safe for the human's uses. Doctors and medical workers are also trained to identify these minor hazards and to assess whether or not a vaccination is appropriate for people with particular health conditions. The anti-vaccination movements. While the world works to attain herd immunity, the anti-vaccination movement and the vaccine misinformation bring back attention to the core issue of why herd immunity is so difficult to obtain. Anti-vaccination in misinformation, according to health experts, is a major issue. People who refuse to get vaccinated endanger their own health as well as health in others on the whole society. Because of falsely accused information being heard and seen online, more people have been concerned about the vaccine in recent years. These persons may already be in legitimate reservation or doubts, such as about the vaccine safety or side effects, and may distrust the governments or firms that develop and distribute these vaccines. Some people may not realize that the content being viewed and being shared is not that accurate, hence spread the disinformation of these fake news. What roles does duty of care in vaccine negligence plays a part in? So there are various reasons why we should avoid becoming infected with the coronavirus. This is because behind a person's obligation is to care for others. By assuring individual well-being, welfare, compliances, and excellent practice, the scope of care or duty is protected against the transmission of the virus. So anti-vaccine campaigns are not usually held in front of health authorities compared to the United States, and instead, mostly the conflict is waged on social media. Therefore, heuristics ranging from cognitive biases to negative biases can play a crucial role in determining these measurements of duty. These are the heuristics that give perspective to these anti-vaccine movements and to have why their views on rejecting the vaccines. So, cognitive biases are a fact of life. When people want a certain idea or a concept to be true, they believe it to be true. They are motivated by wishful thinking. For example, they believe that the vaccines are created from substances where they have negative effects and yet unknown, leading to skepticism and doubts, which is not to be vaccinated is the best choice to avoid these doubts. However, negative biases exist from heuristics to measure the reasons too. The negative biases relates to the reason evaluating events or which individuals has influence on. When confronted with unfavorable information, they react immediately. So, in the United States, like individuals who score the calculation measure actively seek data, often more concerned about the vaccination than those who score lower. The concern is whether a person, for example, like they ask if is the vaccination risky, and all that is being presented is content that reinforces the person's previous ideas. That is negativity bias. Okay, so addressing medical racism. Unlike in the United States, where individual takes the streets in large groups to protest vaccination, the conflict in Malaysia is largely waged on social media. Therefore, many of the far extremist groups that circulating misleading information about the US presidents are also spreading incorrect information about these vaccines in the United States, of course. So the focus of this research will be on the aggressiveness of the anti-vaccination movement in both nations too. As a result, the influence or the effect of vaccination is unquestionably crucial for our future and responsibilities, and there is no proof that any current COVID-19 vaccinations will completely protect against the virus, and this has ramifications for the possibility of achieving this herd immunity. The reality is that most vaccines do not completely protect against this infection, even if they can avoid disease symptoms, because anti-vaxxers, they can start pandemics, they can avoid this pandemic to end by changing the meaning of the original terminology to reflect on how dangerous a vaccine could be. So to acquire the herd immunity while reducing extent of responsibilities owed to others, it means that the anti-vaccination groups frequently resist obtaining herd immunity or completely vaccinated society, stating that the vaccines are too new in this decade. It is vital to highlight that the scope of duties is based on the COVID-19 vaccinations that are available now. Because of the truth in achieving herd immunity for a certain virus is incredibly impossible unless the entire planet is vaccinated, the resonance of one scope of duty is tremendously crucial. Early evidence suggests that certain vaccines may not able to be reduced, if not fully, may be able to reduce, if not fully eliminate the virus transmission. This does not says that the society basic responsibility is to act in a different way to others. When the coronavirus transmits from one person to the other person, it picks up minutes of changes into its genetic code. But from my study, the scientists are beginning to notice patterns on how the virus mutates. New variants, such as the Delta and the Omicron, with the ability to spread faster, are resurfacing and raising the questions whether they may render the vaccines ineffective. Okay. Let us proceed to the third chapter of this study. The methodology. The philosophy employed for this research is interpretivism, research philosophy using qualitative research design and ethnography as the subject of study or the field of the research. The methods acquired for the data range from primary to secondary. The primary techniques and the secondary techniques are displayed in these slides. And in terms of the interviews, as the researcher, I interviewed the individuals with medical vaccination fields, also with attending speeches and talks organized by these educational sectors of certain universities, and has constructed an impromptu individual interviews after listening to the lectures. The researcher, me, also volunteered as a COVID-19 vaccination volunteer at a vaccination center as for participation observation in conjunction with PACE, Partnership for COVID Elimination Movement in MSU. So following by internet articles and news reviews as well as book reading and analysis, the event talks particularly on subjects related to the research, and the questions are unscripted at the end of the session. Furthermore, the event was live streamed, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the research was conducted while we are still in quarantine and coping with this COVID-19 outbreak, making the commitment and contribution to this work very wise and eligible. So in terms of interviews, I have also interviewed individuals with medical vaccination fields, which are being conducted online too because of the SOP, standard operating procedures, and the questions were asked ahead of time because the interviewees were occupied with their schedules, and the researcher, me, chose to save time on the interview by primarily asking about their perspective on the anti-vaccinators. So because this study article analyzed on the statistics from United States and Malaysia, it especially reliable to acquire source of information and evaluate opinions from the social networks of both nations. So this is my data analysis. Part 1 is the relevance of empathy and its connection to the extent of duty of care in vaccination research domain. The researcher of this paper, me, I am a pro-vaccine enthusiast or an advocate. I wear a mask both indoor and outdoor sometimes, and I have defined the extent of duty of care into finding the empathy or sympathy with anti-vaccination voters, as well as it affects the scope of herd immunizations. So also for part 2, the method of measuring duties and the determination of empathy, and part 3 is the list of prevalent beliefs by anti-vaccination activists and the justification for this empathy for those specified reasons. Part 2 is the method of measuring duties and the determination of empathy. So, if the truth is the goal, the public should spend more time considering how society is able to connect there, whether through scientifically, politically biased debate over anti-vaccine narrative based on television news, personal social media, politicians, and medical journals, correcting and linking with this empathy. However, this is not to say that all forms of attention bias are equally valid. As from my interviews, Professor Ramalingam makes a distinction between an act and an omission. He emphasizes that having to refuse vaccines, especially in Malaysia, does not imply to an omission. However, when Dr. Sharul Mizan, from my findings, he talks about the difference between duties and rights, and it relates to the circumstances because empathy can be regarded as a right. To put it in another way, it means that a reasonable person should have the right to feel empathy in any situation. So, finding empathy with this anti-vaccine does not mean that me as the researcher should sympathize with all their actions or their claims. Furthermore, one should not regard this group as people and they share the same beliefs. That is how to measure the empathy. So on part 3, which is the list of prevalent beliefs, is like the common reasons for anti-mask and anti-vaccine sentiments, as well as whether empathy is justified and argued. So some institutions of power, such as the government, the media, or pharmaceutical companies, promote vaccinations only for financial gain. This is from the USA perspective. So the vaccines and masks are also can be ineffective. This is what they view it as. So Seoul's continuous announcement in the media that masks and vaccines are an absolute requirement in the fight against COVID instills fear. So the fact that COVID-19 is not as harmful as the people have been told to believe. And this is executed that the government can persuade citizens that they acquire government's protection in order the citizens to re-elect them or place blind trust in them. So I have categorized the underlying issues into 3 categories. So the first categories will be for issue 1, 2, and 3. The efficacy of the vaccines will be on issue 4, and the battle of the sites will be under category 3, third category, under the third category. We'll see. Next slide. Okay. Sorry. So this is on the first category into distributing those issues. Similarly, if a politician has a large number of Facebook or Instagram followers, their followers will eventually use the first person heuristics, as explained before, into gathering information such as having doubts and concerns whether to take the vaccines. And after hearing some related aspects of the vaccine, such as the vaccine's content being not certified as halal, So the fact that the government is so profit driven, according to this research, is one of the reasons why the government should actually care about getting past this COVID-19 pandemic. So many pro-vaccine and pro-mask persons will want to add to the topic that surrounding trust is not about the government or the pro-vaccines or the pro-mask, because in Malaysia, as mentioned by Professor Muhammad Rizal, not certified doctor agrees on the safety of the vaccine. Nevertheless, this is less an issue because majority of the health officials in Malaysia or the health ministry, they encourage the Malaysians to get vaccinated. So the crucial term here is a role, and not only the main role, but I am concerned with the fear mongering and believes that everything is staged and there is no virus to be concerned about. And then it is likely to emphasize that the definition of COVID dying is suggesting. So empathy for the anti-vaccines people, even if they are qualified as doctors or academics, is not much of a causation for the anti-vaccines, of course. Next is, in contrast to Malaysia, the media in the United States is free to report without any constraints, as the country has the freedom of press. So the media director in the United States explains that citizens would have been upset either way if citizens had waited until all I's were dotted and were crossed into fine publication was released. This is on the vaccine and the coronavirus. And people would question if the new rules were actually supported by evidence if the media announced it first. And these pro-vaccine advocates take the accuracy of this knowledge for granted and are proud of it, but it is not evident as it is to be believed. So the efficacy and importance of vaccine are simply making it clear, because there is so much information and the media's treatment of science is somehow misleading. They will write a news article that science proved this, a new study shows that, and rather than actually seeking the rightful information. So science as a whole is constantly being open to doubt about evolving. But when the media portrays one voice as the ability to override all the previous research, it has conditioned people to believe that any changes in thought is a lie and they are not actually following science. So it should take time to produce, because somehow media has conditioned citizens to believe that how science is somehow stable in its truth and readily available when it is actually not evolving. So this is on the second category. So this is basically when I was volunteering, a serious conversation with the nurses by me, the researcher who volunteered at the vaccination center, emphasized on the current situations on the genuine behavior of pro-vaccine and pro-mask. So I've discovered that the information acquired at the vaccination center are some person wearing masks but does not wear them properly or carefully, as their responsibility is to do so, which in order to spread the virus from spreading, To encourage this mask use, I suggest that the individuals should be righteous in their grasp of science, how to use masks correctly and to get the vaccine successfully, on being on the right side of science. Okay, so this COVID-19 virus is new, since something science has taken a lot of time to investigate and to update the current knowledge on. So today's pro-science environment are being somehow mocked from being ignoring with all their science beliefs. So this is on the efficacy of the vaccines. And the third category is the battle of sides for the issue number 5. So one, I would like to draw from this study that the coronavirus will become an endemic without repeating the history of the world pandemic diseases such as the cholera outbreak, which happened in the 19th century. So this is when humanity has realized that there are bacteria that are invisible to the human eye and water and can transmit illness even though it seems clean and normal. So finally, to link this historical past and the present COVID-19 pandemic, that human nature strives to solve problems and prevent repeating pandemic history as accurately as possible. So in short, the link between this historical past and the present COVID-19 pandemic is that human nature strives to solve problems, and then by the end of the day, both pro and anti-vaccine sides are this debate who would want to have the best resolution to this pandemic, and that is the goal, and not proving of one's superiority and making the other side feel less relevant. So as the study draws to a close, it should be noted that the theory that the greater the number of people who refuse the vaccines, the greater the scope of responsibility being owed, and the further away from both nations herd immunity would be reached. So a shift in people's anti-vaccine ideas or will be more eager to get immunized is the important factor of the pandemic to become endemic. Even if there is no anti-vaccine advertising, more vaccination information is still required. Aside from stating the main objective of the study in the future, this study says that whether anti-vaccine campaigners or people who reject the vaccines deserve a duty of care to others because they are responsible for someone to catch the coronavirus. So if someone joined the anti-vaccine activists voluntarily, they subsequently contracted COVID at one of their demonstrations, I would not hold the activists. I chooses not to hold the activists liable because the individual who contracted the virus is voluntarily joined, so it's on himself. Finally, the study suggests that pro-vaccine campaigners have more power than anti-vaccine activists because in persuading individuals to get vaccinations, and that style of media used compelling enough to support the narrative. Thank you so much.